Would you tell us about the types of olive oils that you have in your kitchen? I kind of assume you have more than one type. So please tell us what you have and why you have what you have.
We use 3 different varieties. 2 are local. So one is called Barnea, and one is called Syrian, and one is Picual, which is a Spanish variety. Well, picual I like to use more for seasoning. Picual that you'll get in Spain and the picual that I use in Israel is very different, but it's still very, very gentle, and I like to use it more for finishing dishes. And the picual and the banea are very pungent and spicy and sometimes even bitter. I mean, the Syrian is even more, banea I can say is even a little lighter. So we do a blend of both. So I usually really use them for anything that has like a confit or a long kind of process, and obviously gentle cooking, not high heat.
What would you say to a chef to convince them that they need to be cooking with more than one or using more than one type of oil, olive oil?
So I would say that first I need to convince myself to use more varieties. Because in Israel we have really 2 main varieties, and I really like the idea of using what grows locally, and is indigenous more than what grows locally. That's indigenous to Israel, other than the one that I was saying that is Spanish. But yeah, I'm so interested in the different flavors that you can get from different olive oils and how much they affect. I joke around with my dad. He has this olive oil that he gets from the old city, from our fellow Arabs that are very good at producing olive oil, and I really dislike it. I think that every time I use it at home and I cook at home at my parents' house, I'm like, this is overtaking the whole dish. It's good for hummus and that's it. So, it really depends what you're cooking. So I am going to be honest and say that I really do only use 3 of these varieties that I was saying previously. But I do think that as time goes by and I get more time, it is interesting to go more in depth, but definitely there's so much impact on the kind of olive oil that you use. It's very, especially for myself, that I'm very sensitive. I have a sensitive palate, so I can really notice what kind of olive oils are used.
And I know you run a plant-based kitchen. Would you talk about how important olive oil is in the plant-based kitchen? Would you say it's maybe more important than in a kitchen where you're using meat?
So we do use preferably olive oil for almost all of our methods of cooking in our plant-based kitchen. It's very important because that's the best kind of oil that we can get that's not from an animal. But yeah, it really depends on what I'm cooking, but sometimes I do like to not use olive oils that are very strong in flavor because they can be very intense and overpowering. But we do like to take olive oils and flavor them if it's with herbs or peppers, or a lot of our dishes are not only using regular olive oil, but it can be garlic oil or fermented. We have a fermented citrus peel oil, and we have habanero oil, and so on. So we do use a lot of herbs with our olive oil just to give it an extra flavor. So in plant-based cooking, you are always looking to be more in depth with our flavors. So using olive oil and, if you will, herbs is a good technique.
I've heard some chefs talk about how olive oil really, helps these vegetable flavors and characters to blossom. That it really makes vegetables more kind of lush and satisfying. Would you talk about that a little bit, if you think that as well?
Obviously, when you're using butter to cook a vegetable, so you're going to taste a lot of butter and some vegetable. And when you're using olive oil, especially if you're using a very mild kind of flavored olive oil, you will enhance the flavor of the vegetable. It's definitely. But for me, I do like to cook a lot in olive oil, but I do think that it's also, if you finish with olive oil, so the vegetable even gets more of a shine, more of a place, and not like this very overpowering flavor if it's from an animal kind of fat, I would say. So I do think that cooking with olive oil for fruit and vegetables is the best you can do for them.
What about, and this question just occurred to me, I mean, the texture that you get from in an animal kitchen, in a kitchen where they use animal fats, you get, you have stock and you have that kind of viscosity from animal, from bones and so forth. Does olive oil have a role to play in maybe contributing some texture to dishes?
So definitely, I mean, I'm always looking to get those umami / that fatty mouthfeel, if it's like you were saying, from a stock or some kind of preparation that involves animal fat. So we do use a lot of olive oil when we do reductions, like let's say like the jus, where you're feeling this like fatty, super umami flavor. So we do that. We like reduce, for example, like a fermented mushroom stock, and then we add the olive oil in the end. And that's that texture that you get like from the animal fat, you get it from olive oil. So yes, we do use olive oil in that kind of way. I mean, we have been also taking olive oil and like freezing it in pacojet, if you know that kind of machine. So we make a kind of a butter from oil, and then like you add it like it would be butter, and it has the kind of like same emulsifying I would say texture to a sauce, or finishing the sauce or something like that. So definitely olive oil, and especially myself, that I love fat so much. That's, I think, my problem in life, that I'm in love with the fatty textures. So I'm always looking for that. And I think that olive oil, I mean, it's never going to be the same. That's something that is always very important to emphasize. It's never going to be the same as like using butter or other animal fat, but it does have the ability to fill some kind of a mouthfeel that I like to use for sure.
Can you talk about a specific dish, or more than one, on your menu that really highlights the character of either the Pequot or the indigenous oils that you say you use, where there's just a great synergy between the oil and the dish that you're making?
Right now, I'll give the example of a few dishes that we have on the menu that are very focused on olive oil. So we have one of my favorites is fermented lychee, that we ferment the lychee, and then we put it on a rosemary skewer, and we confit it in smoked olive oil. And then we grill it on the Japanese grill. And then underneath we have these peppers, guajillo and ancho, that we simmer for a really long time with garlic and a lot of olive oil. And then we blend them with some house-made vinegar. And so there's a lot of oil going on. And then there's this Israeli kind of bread, Yemenite kind of bread. It's called lachouch. And so we make that, and you eat it together. So it's like not too much fat, but it's something that blends. So I could say that's very much olive oil focused. I'm always thinking of what I have on the menu right now. So let's see. Okay, so we do also have, I think there's a lot of preparations more than dishes, other than the lychee, that's really heavily oiled. I think that a lot of, like, I can talk more maybe about the preparations that are very focused on different olive oils. As I was saying, we make this. We have a black pearl mushroom dish on the menu, and it consists of this sauce that we make from aged blueberries and mushroom stock. And this mushroom stock has 3 different preparations of mushrooms, and we grill them, and then we vacuum pack them for like 2 weeks and lots of olive oil. And then we have another mushroom that is smoked, and then we combine, and then another mushroom that is just grilled and fermented. And then we combine all of them together and we cook them for like 45 minutes. And then you have that fatty texture of like a very, very intense stock, and then we reduce it. And then there's this like very nice mouthfeel. So that, and then as I was saying, we have, oh, that's actually a good one too. We have right now we have a melon on the menu, and it is melons that we let's say put with smoked miso for 5 days in a vacuum pack, and then we dehydrate them for maybe 20 hours with garlic oil, a lot of garlic oil. Then we thinly slice them, and there's this sauce and so on. And then it has also this habanero oil with the fermented orange peels. What else? We did have for a while, it was a olive oil ice cream, but that's not on the menu anymore. So I think that's enough, right?
It sounds like olive oil in your kitchen is not just, it's not just a fat that you use to saute or drizzle on at the end. It's a real flavor, a real key flavor for you in your dishes. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Cooking with plants really is, for me, enhancing what they are. And also, I have to say, looking for the fat, looking for the extra flavor. And you can't just simmer something in brown butter and it will be brown butter that everyone loves. You have to kind of think out of the box. So as I was saying, I love to flavor oils, olive oils, and then every oil is very specific to the same dish. We have seaweed oil also on one and one of our dishes. We have green oils that consist of celery flowers. I mean, every dish at OPA consists of a fruit or a vegetable. So we try to take one fruit or vegetable and just like rip it apart with techniques. So obviously using the olive oil will be specific. If it's a celery dish, so we have celery flower oil. If it's the melon, so it's not going to be melon oil, but it's going to be something to do with the melon, So it's like every dish has their own flavoring of oil, and maybe not the varieties changing, but the flavors, yes, because I do believe that there's so much that we can produce flavor-wise with olive oils. And as I said, I love fat. So,
well, I want to talk about that a little bit more because it seems like in the U.S., cooks, both chefs and home cooks, we use oil very sparingly. We just put enough on the skillet to saute something, or we just drizzle a few drops on something at the end. But in the Mediterranean, cooks are seems like more generous with olive oil. They don't. Would you talk a little bit more about how you, how you think about olive oil in your kitchen?
How I think about olive oil. I mean, it's very, I would say it's a thin line to feel, that there's too much olive oil in something, because I do understand the generosity. I mean, we do have a lot of dishes in the Mediterranean that is, it's a lot of oil, So I think the key really is when you feel the oil, it's when the oil has been cooked, So it has this like too much oil flavor. But rather than when you finish with olive oil that hasn't been touched and is very pure, then you feel something very different. So to me, it's kind of taking the cooking, doing it not too much olive oil, and then finishing it maybe with more oil. And then you don't feel that, oh my God, I'm eating oil. Like that's not a good, that's like a little too much. So I don't like you to use too much oil, but I do understand the difference between cooking with oil that you get a product that's too oily, rather than finishing something with untouched pure oil. It's a different feel in your mouth. So I'm careful. If I do confit, so I'm very careful to strain whatever was in the oil, and obviously the temperatures are very, very important. So I'm very sensitive in that term of really understanding what is the limit, and how not to overdo it. I would say, it's very common everywhere in Israel to just get some bread with tons of olive oil. We don't do that at Oka. It's different. We do use a lot of oil, it's true, but you have to kind of find the balance that people don't feel that they're eating too much oil, because that's not so much fun. So
A lot of people really have a hard time with some of the more pungent oils, the really bitter and early harvest oils that can be very bitter and piquant. What strategies would you suggest to chefs and home cooks to make those oils more approachable? Are there some dishes or ingredients that you pair with them to make these pungent oils more easier to love?
So I think that, as I was saying earlier, really the pungent, and especially the Syrian and the Banana, they're very, very bitter and very strong, especially in the beginning of harvest. So for me, I would say with my olive oil purveyor, we wait a while just to let the flavors relax for a minute. And also not to finish with these kind of oils unless you're really doing something that is I don't want to sound so like typical, because this is something we really don't do at OPA, but I'm going to just say it. If you're eating hummus, so if you put a lot of that kind of strong olive oil, that's good, because you're eating it with bread, and you have something to kind of balance it in a way. But I would say either cook with this kind of oil or let it age, even though a lot of would say that, the best oil is right away. But we do let our olive oil age a little bit so it relaxes, because it's very, very, very bitter and very strong. So that's what I do. And depending what you're making, if you're making a very delicate dish, that I would not be using very strong olive oil. But if you're using something that's going to go with bread or some kind of long cooking preparation, that's fine, because I do feel with mild heat, it does reduce a little bit. But especially the aging, I would say in a dark, very cool place.
You talked about using the Spanish picual, and you talked about a Syrian oil, and you talked about using local indigenous oil. Would you talk a little bit more about the Israeli oils?
We do have, I think, two, there are for sure more varieties, but the two very, I would say, popular varieties that we used are the Barnea, which is less popular than the Syrian, that's often used more, and also less pungent and spicy, I would say. It's from actually indigenous to Sinai, which is like 20 kilometers south of southern Israel. I think that it grows, obviously it grows in the desert, and that kind of soil really impacts the oil to be spicy, more flavorful. So that I would say about the Barnea, and the Syrian is also spicy and very pungent, but I would say it's a lot harder to use than the Barnea. Like it's very, very, very rough. Even though there are purveyors in Israel that have been doing a good job with that, it's a very strong variety. And Picual is the one that we use. It's Spanish, so I don't think it's relevant. So, I mean, for me, I like to blend both of them because I feel that it creates a more balanced kind of olive oil, but it's very, very specific. I mean, the olive oil that we use at the restaurant is grown, the trees are grown in southern Israel, and they are watered with very salty water. So it really helps. I mean, it's hard for the trees to grow, but at the same time, that produces some very unique kind of olives that have this saltiness to them and a strong flavor, but also it has been shown that they're also much more healthier. So, I mean, that's for me, it's a lot about, okay, these olives are going to be tasting different if they're grown in northern Israel rather than where they should be growing, and which is in the south of Israel, and that's where we get our olive oil. So, I mean, it's going to be, these varieties are going to taste different depending where they grow, really, because the climate has so much to do with it, the kind of water, the kind of soil, as I was saying. So for me, really, it's knowing that I'm using olive oil from trees that have been, I would say, growing where they should naturally grow, that has a lot of impact on the flavor.
You know, you use olive oil in different ways in the spring than you do in the summer or fall, or whether you shift the type of oil that you use. Do you use, the type of oil in the spring than you do in the fall?
I would say depends more on the methods of what I'm using. Obviously, if we're doing a spring menu, it's going to be less heavy cooking, lighter food. So it would be, I would say, lighter. But I mean, in the winter, it's heavier, it's warm. You know, you're creating this warmth to your food to, I don't know, to create some warmth inside, I would say, even though it's not so cold here. But yeah, I don't think that there is it's more the methods rather than the types of oil, really.
Let's imagine that you're having a dinner party at home and all your diners are vegan, which is how you cook anyway.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through a menu, something you might make, and what that would showcase olive oil and showcase plant forward cooking? And if you could talk maybe about what style of oil you would use for each dish, a lighter one for this dish or a more robust one for that one.
I would say wouldn't be, I guess, the OPA style of cooking, maybe something more simple. So I love, right now it's summer. So in Israel, we have more interesting fruit than vegetables. And actually, it reminds me that like 2 or 3 years ago, I did a home kind of dinner that was 11 courses based only on fruits. So using them not as to be sweet. So that was very interesting to me. And so I can give like examples that say, let me think what I made there. That was interesting. Oh, that was good. Yeah. We had figs. So we take the figs, the heart of the figs with how do you say melon baller, right? Yeah. And then we put these I would say fig balls on these inside of flavored oil. So they absorb this interesting flavor and also keep themselves from oxidizing. It was actually with za'atar. So it's a kind of a herb. And then we had very complex, I won't say the whole technique. It's too long, but I would say different kinds of figs into one sauce. And then we had, what else do I like? I mean, I like using raspberries and blueberries in different techniques. If they're, some were mixed with garlic oil and miso, and then charred, and made this parsley oil with scallions and salty bush, if you know. What else? There was that lychee that I was talking about. I just love using olive oil with fruit. It's so interesting to me. And so I would do, I think, like very light dishes that have one fruit in the center, and really using the vegetables as side aids, I would say. So that would be probably it. And then maybe olive oil ice cream, if I manage to do that. Oh yes, now I'm reminded. We had a watermelon that was salted and then confit and then dehydrated, and then we served that with like a watermelon vinegar and herbs and mustard, and then there was this cannel of horseradish oil that we managed to make like a butter through the pacojet. So that was interesting. You're like cutting into a watermelon that's very fatty, because of its texture that happens through the cooking in olive oil and its own texture after cooking, really. And then you're cutting into this like frozen but nice buttery texture of olive oil. So that one was a good one.
Well, your style is clearly very original. And,
Yeah.
pairing fruit and olive oil is a little shocking, probably to some people. But would you talk about how, what type of olive oil works best in these fruit-forward dishes? Do you tend to lean towards a more delicate oil or a more robust oil? We're trying to get at helping chefs understand that there are different oils for different uses. So if you could talk about...
Oh, okay, I understand. So if we're talking about really using fruits as something that is more salty, I would say using a more pungent oil is more interesting, because fruit, if you're especially trying to manipulate the fruit, so you want to use some intense flavoring agents. So I would say the more intense ones are good. But if you're creating like, this very first delicate dish of a strawberry, with some olive oil and salt. So obviously use it it really depends what kind of fruit or vegetable you are using. I think, if you're using a very delicate, say cucumber, I don't know how to say delicate about fruit or vegetables. To me, they're all just fascinating, but I would say, let's say a cucumber is more delicate, so like using something more strong on a cucumber could be more interesting and perhaps enhancing, but also you really have to be just, I think, sensitive to what is put in front of you, produce wise, because that is really the indication of, okay, am I going to create a contrast, kind of like pairing wine, how am I going to balance this out? So I think that is what should be thought of,
Yeah, the wine analogy is a great one, because we spend so much time thinking about great food and wine matches. Are there any great food and oil matches that you can think of that you've experienced?
I mean, it's not Israeli, okay? So I just really, the picual that the picual that I tasted in Spain and the one in Israel are not the same, but I love it. It's so gentle. It can I was doing this kind of like fast of eating only fruit and vegetables with no oil and no salt. And I remember the first time that I had contact with this oil after not eating olive oil for 2 or 3 weeks, I had tears in my eyes because it was so unique and so gentle on my palate, but yet so powerful, So there's something really to look at, and you really obviously have to taste. You have to taste. You have to know how to use olive oils, because not all olive oils are created equally. So really depends on how it is by itself. But yeah, I think the picual just is it's my favorite. And my purveyor, really, he has like 2,000 trees, and out of them, like, he has 50 trees. And I'm like, listen, I beg him, I'm like, save them all for me. And it obviously does not last all year. So I really cherish that olive oil when I have it.
Let's end with just wondered if you had any final comments about how important olive oil is to your style of cooking, your particular plant forward style of cooking.
Some final comments. I mean, look, I'm not a nutritionist, I would say, but it's obvious that olive oil is super healthy for you. And just, you take one olive and you squeeze it, and naturally the oil comes out. I mean, it's like a nature's wonder in my eyes. So just the varieties are so interesting to me. So obviously the impact, knowing that you're working with something that is naturally occurring and out off a tree, and it's such a long process, and such it's kind of like making wine in a way, as I was saying really earlier, because you have to I mean, they're not hand picking them anymore, but it's kind of like that, you have to go through the olives and get them right away to the olive oil producer and so on. So really it's about that. I mean, it's so unique, and every variety, it's like you can taste and taste and taste and taste and taste, and everyone is different. Even the same variety, if you go northern Israel or south, it's so it's endless, really. I mean, obviously butter is also not created equally, but really olive oil, I think, is much more interesting when you really go into the depth of it. There's so much more that you can taste. And really, as you were saying earlier, it's also a point for me to think how I can really use different varieties and pair them even more than what I do now, and appreciate that, I think. And I think people should understand more about olive oils. And it's not everyone has the palate to understand, but perhaps it's like tasting wine. The more there are professional olive oil tasters, and also myself, I remember in the beginning when I was searching for olive oil for my restaurant, I really was learning how to taste the olive oil, and you really have to learn what is the indication of what is good, So it's a world. That's what I would say in conclusion. It's a whole world to discover and taste.